King, comfort of the Spirit, true to giver, president, fill us all things, treasure, blessings, and giver of life. Come and abide us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good. So, I think we stopped with 8. If that's...
Yeah, I think we'd finished 8. We were about to start 9. Is that right?
9? Yep. Okay. So who would like to read chapter 9?
I'm happy to get us started, Vladika, but my voice might give out midway through.
No worries.
All right. It is superfluous for me to write to you about the ministry for the saints, for I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the people of Macedonia, saying that Achaia has been ready since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. But I am sending the brothers so that our boasting about you may not prove empty in this matter, so that you may be ready, as I said you would be. Otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, to say nothing of you, for being so confident. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead to you and arrange in advance for the gift you have promised, so that it may be ready as a willing gift, not as an exaction. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiently in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he is distributed freely, he is given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ, and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. While they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you, thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift.
Okay. Go back. So St. Paul sent some of his co-workers from Macedonia to Corinth to prepare them for his arrival, and especially to prepare a financial gift that Paul would be taking with him to Jerusalem. There's so many people have such often very strange ideas about the relationship between, the church and money. But here you can see that St. Paul has absolutely no qualms about talking about it. And indeed, encouraging people to be very generous in their giving. So here, it says that Achaia has been ready since last year. In other words, where Corinth is, and so that Paul boasting about them may not come out empty when he as he is in Macedonia. So otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, to say nothing of you, for being so confident. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead and arrange in advance for the gift you have promised, so that it may be ready as a willing gift and not an exaction. It sounds like a pretty substantial financial contribution, to say the least. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work, as it is written. He has distributed freely, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. I think this is really important for us as we consider stewardship to the church. One of the most important things that was stressed by Archbishop Dimitri, who was my mentor in the episcopate, was the importance of tithing, and that the life and the work of the church is based on a commitment to the church, which includes a financial commitment of tithing. That means 10% off the top. And people say, oh, this is Protestant, oh, this is, and all of this stuff. Well, or that it's cultural or something. The reality is that the church works best when you have people who tithe. And if people don't tithe, you never have enough money for anything. ROCOR is particularly bad in this because the people don't tithe. Instead, there's this dues system, which, you can barely support the work of a church on a dues system, especially $50 a month or something like that. and it doesn't, and there's no money for anything. There's not enough money to pay a priest and a mortgage. And if the priest does get paid, he's paid a pittance very often. And one of the great shames that we have in ROCOR is that we have many priests who are actually on welfare and food stamps because the church refuses to support them adequately. This is shameful. And this is something that has to change. So I think this is even though this is not referring to constant support of this church, this is referring to specifically to to a gift being prepared to be sent overseas, actually to the mother church, to Jerusalem. It's important to understand what St. Paul is saying. He who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. My guess is that the churches that are that have more than adequate finances, not only to pay the clergy, but to do missionary outreach and to serve their parishioners beyond just the liturgical life of the church, also are the ones that are growing. And the churches that do not support their clergy, who do not have the kinds of outreach and programs that generate the kind of interest and support, they're probably dying on the vine. And there are plenty of churches that are dying on the vine, and not just in ROCOR. But one of the things that you always find is that their finances are not in order. And so part of this, I think we can take from this, is that St. Paul is talking about how important it is for the church's finances to be in order. He says, God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work, as it is written, is given to the distributed freely, given to the poor. God is not going to supply the money for the church. we do. So he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. In other words, if you'll be enriched if you're generous in your gift, and God will bless it, and that will and those blessings will go out to the people for whom those gifts are intended, and they will give thanks to God. For the ministry of the service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel. In other words, we submit to the gospel, and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. While they long for you and pray for you, because of the surpassing grace of God upon you. Thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift. And how does grace overflow in us? In generosity, in love and compassion and desire to help the other. So, any questions or comments on this?
Well, there's we had some Greek people that have been coming to St. Herman's, and they've told me that in the Greek jurisdiction, that it's a cultural thing that they're ashamed if their priest doesn't live well. It's a reflection of their generosity, and that's why the Greeks priests make so much money and have nice houses and all that, and they have they were even gifted nice cars and so forth, because it's a reflection. It's a matter of pride for the congregation to take care of their priests. I wonder how we could get that attitude going in ROCOR.
That's a good question.
I mean, how do you change the attitude? Because it's, I understand there was time too in Russia when the state supported the church, and so people got in the habit of, okay, well, I don't have to because the state's doing it.
Well, the Tsar is long gone.
but the attitude remains.
Yep.
I don't know how to change it. How do you?
Well, it's something that needs to be changed. If we're going to fulfill our mission as the Russian Church outside of Russia in this country, in order to bear witness to the integrity of the gospel, which is what ROCOR is really all about, it needs to be well funded, and the priests need to be supported so that they're not having to work a job or two outside of beyond the church, and try and minister to the church, because that doesn't work either. One thing I have to say, I've had some rather negative things to say about the OCA, but one of the things that they have done very, I think, right, is that they have worked very hard to increase clergy compensation and to bring it up to a livable level. No, it doesn't have to be, $200,000 like some of the Greek priests a year, but it needs to be adequate for the priest to live in an appropriate way. There's this idea that's out there. Oh, the priest should be poor. That's a disaster. That's an unmitigated disaster.
Well, Dick, you mentioned that the dues structure is not a good structure, but could it be made into an effective structure? I mean, if suppose you doubled or tripled the required dues, would that maybe just push too many people from out of becoming members of the church, or what do you think about that?
Well, the due structure makes it into a club, and the church is not a club, and we have a duty to support the church in an adequate manner, which usually, if you know, on a scriptural basis, is a tithe, is 10%. So, for example, if you were to take say the median income in Washington is probably what, 150? So $12,000 a month, give or take, $13,000 a month. We could increase the dues to $1,200 a month. I don't think that would go over very well. You know, down here in the free part of Virginia, you know, the non Yankee occupied territory.
Bravo.
I think what's that?
Bravo.
Yeah. The median income, I think, is about 110, 120. So that's about so 10,000 a month, and so each tithing unit should probably be giving $1,000 a month. Now, can you imagine what the church could do if the members actually contributed $1,000 a month, or even $500 a month? Much less 50. You know, 50 is what it like. 50 is at there's a certain cathedral that I know that where the dues are 50, I think. But the clergy are not paid. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And it's not fair to them. And ultimately, it doesn't provide the services that church should be able to provide, being a major cathedral in the middle of the city, much less in the capital of the country. So, and the thing, you know, part of the thing too is, you know, people will say, oh, well, you know, they're not doing that in Russia now. Well, maybe not, but I know there are some places that are. And some of the biggest fans of the tithing program in the South were actually people who were cradle Orthodox from ethnic backgrounds, because they saw the old system, they saw that it didn't work, and they saw the difference that tithing made, and so they were very anxious to support that and the life of the church that comes from that. Because if people are invested with their money, they're going to be invested with the rest of their lives. And if they're not invested with their money, you know, as the Lord said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Well, so I think this is important for us to think about.
There's an issue, Ladika, there's an issue in Russia that our friend Misha just has talked to me about, and that is that there's some feeling, which I think he joins in, that the national Orthodox Church or the diocesan church takes too much away from the local parish. And I don't really have an opinion on that, but I just wondered what your opinion was.
Well, it depends. I don't know what they do in Russia. In ROCOR, the parish tithes to the diocese. So 10% of the parish's income goes to the diocese. In the OCA, you have a different structure. You have 10% of the parish income goes to the diocese, plus people have an assessment that goes directly to the national church. I don't know if they've gotten rid of that. They were talking about that. It only makes sense if they do. But all those are monies that, while they don't pass through the parish, could go to a much larger parochial, financial base. So I don't know.
In other words, it's a balance between what the parish's mission is and the diocesan and the national. So
Right.
our equation needs to be worked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I can tell you that it's, of course it's a different situation. I was in the Diocese of the South as a bishop, 12 years ago, or 14 years ago, and then head of the OCA. But the salary I've got now is about a third, and that's interesting. That takes some creativity, shall we say.
Well,
and I'm not complaining. I'm just making the observation.
I'll just make an observation. I think that ROCOR should have a diocese of the South, and they don't have that, and that's a problem.
I think if there was a group of people that wanted to support that, they should talk to the Metropolitan, because I don't think he would be opposed to it, quite frankly. It is something very necessary, because the diocese is too big. It's got over 100
There's
parishes.
also a regional identity. If you don't share in the regional identity here, you're sort of an alien jurisdiction.
That's right. What has Connecticut to do with South Carolina, right?
That's right.
Yeah. No.
Well, the hope would be that Virginia ends up in the South, because it's getting more. Yeah, it's more and more north-like all the time.
Yeah.
That's only Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
I spent the weekend in Southside Virginia, and it was anything but, So.
Well, Margaret Ann lives in Richmond, so.
Yeah, we're trying to be the South down here.
Well, I was in Ashland. There was a good outpouring of people, but in downtown Richmond, I heard there were 40,000 people in some gay fest. Oh, it was awful.
It was scary there. During the BLM, is a little bit touch and go. It was scary when they were tearing down the statues and all that. But there's nothing left on Monument Avenue to destroy, so that's kind of fizzled out.
Now it's a magnet for the sodomites. So I just don't know what to say about Richmond.
Oh, great! I got that to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was this week. That was past weekend.
Oh, I missed it.
They said there were 40,000. I don't know if that's true.
Well, who knows?
Well, I was up in Stafford, so.
Good for you.
Yep. We don't have much of that in Stafford.
No. Well, Vlad, to go back to the tithing thing, another problem this causes is that, we need more priests. And, my son is one who wants to be a priest, but he has 4 children.
Uh-huh.
And he's got to feed children. So And that's a really sad thing, is that, you know, ROCOR has churches in what, 19 states. And, you know, if a priest, if a man could go into it with a family and know that his family would be fed and housed, then, you know, we might not have this shortage of priests that we have.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's important to encourage the priests, because a lot of them are there. They may get a little stipend, which is basically just gas money.
Oh dear.
And my salary is probably one of the highest in ROCOR.
Oh dear.
So, yeah.
Well, there are many inspiring things going on, though. Holy Burr-Barrows and Harrisonburg is building a new church, and for the life of me, I don't know where they're getting money, but they're building a beautiful new church in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah.
ROCOR Church.
I'll be there this weekend.
Oh.
On Sunday.
My regards.
Saturday.
Wonderful.
So.
Are you going to dedicate the church? Is it finished?
No. I'm going to tonsure a reader.
Oh.
And so no, they've got a long way to go. It's I think it's weathered in, but they still have a lot of work to do on the inside.
It's a magnificent church.
Yeah, it's huge.
Huge, yeah.
Okay, so we move on to chapter 10. Or does anybody have any more comments? Okay, who wants to read in chapter 10?
I can again if you would like, Vladika, but you'll be stuck with me.
Hey, that's fine.
All right. I, Paul, myself entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away, I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Look at what is before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ's, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ's, so also are we. For even if I boast a little too much of our authority, when the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters, for they say, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. But we will not boast beyond limits, but we will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us, to reach even to you. For we are not overextending ourselves as though we did not reach you. For we were the first to come all the way to you with the gospel of Christ. We do not boast beyond limit in the labors of others, but our hope is that as your faith increases, our area of influence among you may be greatly enlarged, so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you, without boasting of work already done in another's area of influence. But the one who boasts of the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. Sorry, it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, the one whom the Lord commends.
Okay. So, so St. Paul says that in his personal appearance, he's with them. He's humble but bold when he's away through his letters. But he doesn't want to be able to have to show such boldness with confidence as I count against showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. In other words, for the gratification of his own desires. For though we walk in the flesh, we're not waging war according to the flesh. In other words, we're not using carnal and earthly means, but rather the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. In other words, he's fighting by grace and not simply by the works of the body. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. This sounds like some of our contemporary apologists. We destroy every argument and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. It's so easy to become polemical. But here St. Paul talks just about that. And take every thought captive to obey Christ. In other words, to conform every thought to the word of Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. So the point is that our obedience needs to be complete, and he is going to point that out at every stage, contradicting and correcting and enabling us to enter into a much deeper understanding in and through that obedience.
Vladika, is he talking about watchfulness there, or is it something else?
I think he's talking about something more. I mean, certainly watchfulness is part of it, but I think what he's talking about is he's talking about fighting against heresies. Every argument and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. In other words, that's what heresies are. Arguments and opinions against the knowledge of God. And instead of every thought being captive to obedience to Christ, in those arguments and in those heresies, nothing is captive in obedience to Christ. So there is a sense of watchfulness that he's fostering, but he's being bold in his argumentativeness against those who distort the gospel.
What should the punishment for disobedience in heresy, let's say, what should that be? I mean, is there any clue? Is it total exclusion from the body of Christ? Is it?
Well, it depends on what it is. It's so easy to throw around the term heretic and things. And what heresy means is another opinion, a different opinion. And so, what he's talking about is not so much punishing heresy, but but I think to punish a disobedience when it's been made clear that a certain doctrine, a certain way of thinking is really obedience to Christ. In other words, otherwise, the normal punishment for heresy, if somebody is absolutely obstinate in their heresy, is exclusion, is being cut off from communion. So. But Paul is saying that what he's using is not simply human arguments. He's using divine power in his attempt to bring every thought captive to Christ, to obedience to Christ. So. 7. Look at what is before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ's, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ's, so also are we. For even if I boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters, for they say, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. That we dare to classify, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they're without understanding.
I'm afraid I don't quite understand the almost the dissonance between the the authority went away, but the supposed weakness in person. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think it's just that when he's present, Paul was not an impressive character or a good speaker. But when he was away and he would write to the Corinthians or anybody else, his letters, his words were very strong and very impressive, and he would lay down the law essentially. Whereas in person he was very humble and so I think that's the so there's a clue here. Let such a person understand what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. So there must have been some gossip that he's really maybe he wasn't really the author of those letters because he's such a weak person or weak in his presence. Because people were comparing him and classifying him. Oh, he's a bad preacher. Oh, he's small and weak and sickly. He's not like this, superstar evangelist who's got the great haircut and the expensive suit and who preaches so well and you can understand everything he says and on and on and on. In other words, comparing and classifying with those who are commending themselves. In other words, you had people who were commending themselves, who were building themselves up as better than Paul and trying to contradict him.
Doesn't Paul say at some point that be ye of no reputation? Though Paul was humble for himself, but then the contradiction is he's called the Lion of God. So he's very ferocious for the gospel.
Right. Right.
But there seems to be a contradiction. Of course, there is no contradiction.
Well, there's a what he's doing out is he's pointing out the contradictions in the way people have been judging him. So that this last paragraph or last sentence, when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they're without understanding. In other words, you've got one ignoramus comparing himself to another. But they don't understand who Paul is or what he's trying to convey.
Thank you so much, Ladika. I understand it now.
Does that make sense?
Very much so. His response is interesting to me, that, he first kind of directly acknowledges or directly asserts that, essentially no, the writings and the person, they're the same, right? Yep. And then he goes on to, as you said, point out that, essentially, unless you're comparing yourself against truth, then it's nothing.
Yeah. So let's go to 13. But we will not boast beyond limits, but will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us to reach even you. Whoops. Wait a second. There we go. Let's look here at Ambrosiaster. Paul takes advantage of his authority only to the extent that he glories in the progress of believers, so that his power may be conducive to salvation and not self-aggrandizement. He did not boast beyond the power that was given to him, nor did he claim any authority in places where his preaching had not been heard. So Paul is only going to the places where he was assigned. Boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us. I think we can take that quite literally. That there's because we know that St. Paul went to specific places, and he had certain churches that were his work and under his influence, and other apostles had theirs as well. What's interesting is the church is Ephesians, because John was in Ephesus, and he lived in Ephesus with the Mother of God, probably about the same time that Paul was visiting there, or maybe a little bit after. But you don't hear any mention of John in Paul's letters or Paul in John's letters. So we're not overextending ourselves as though we did not reach you. In other words, he did reach them, for we were the first to come all the way to you with the gospel of Christ. We do not boast beyond limit in the labors of others. In other words, we're not talking about what others have done in their own territories. But our hope is that as your faith increases, our area of influence among you may be greatly enlarged. In other words, as the gospel grows and people come to Christ, within the area of responsibility Paul has been given, he's hoping that that will increase, so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you, without boasting of work already done in another's area of influence. In other words, he wants the gospel to grow in the area that he was assigned, so that people can then have him, that he can go beyond those areas into other areas and start preaching there. Says, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord, for it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. And I think that's very important. Not the one who commends himself, who boasts about himself, who specializes in self-aggrandizement, but rather has the grace of the Lord verifying his relationship with him, I guess you could say. Shall we go to 11?
We don't want to keep you too late, Radhika, but I'm eager.
No, we'll go for a little over an hour. So let's do 11.
All right, shall I read again? Would someone else like to?
Go for it.
All right. I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Indeed, I consider that I am not the least inferior to these super apostles, even if I am unskilled in speaking. I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way we have made this plain to you in all things. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself, so that you might be exalted, because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And what I am doing, I will continue to do, in order to undermine the claim of those who like to claim that in their boasted mission they work on the same terms as we do. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. It is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. I repeat, that no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. What I am saying, with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. For you Will you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face? To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned, and 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, dangers from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, and toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, and hunger and thirst, often without food, and cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fail? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands.
Okay.
I've been to that house at Damascus.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, only about 2 years ago. There's a Roman Catholic nunnery there, and it was impressive. I mean, it was the actual house. He escaped over the walls, and that was the beginning of Paul's missionary journeys. The house is still there, and the wall of Damascus is still there.
Yeah,
that section is still there.
It's pretty amazing. This is pretty clear. Paul is, on one hand, ridiculing himself, is holding up his foolishness. These things which he has endured, and indeed to the world they are foolish. It says, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning thoughts, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. In other words, the Corinthians were essentially being under attack by those who had other agendas. Someone claims and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or you receive a different spirit, or accept a different gospel. In particular, what was happening, you had the Judaizers, you had the Docetists, and you had Gnostics, all of whom were essentially vying for the souls of these people and proclaiming themselves the true Christians. And indeed, their gospel is not the gospel that we know, not only not the same book, but not even the same message. And another Jesus, basically a Jesus who is not really incarnate, but more like a spiritual avatar. Or they received a different spirit. I'm not sure what that means, except that the spirits that they received from these false apostles were demons instead. And he says, indeed, I consider that I'm not in the least inferior to these super apostles. Even if I am unskilled in speaking, I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way we have made this plain to you in all things. Some of these super apostles, as he calls them, were probably skilled in rhetoric and skilled in public and other kinds of public speaking, and and they were showmen, and but what they preached was not in accordance with the gospel of Christ.
Do you think he's talking about the Gnostics? Gnosticism purportedly sort of captured the public culture, so like all the LGBT and the art and entertainment today.
Yep.
Gnosticism was a very popular movement. Maybe that's what he means about by saying calling these people super apostles.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. But there were also the Judaizers too.
Well, earlier he talked about raising money for the saints in Jerusalem. So far from being a rival, he was still supporting the church in Jerusalem,
right?
But not the interpretation of the gospel that the Judaizers gave it.
Right. Well, after that Council of Jerusalem, the Judaizing heresy was essentially put down, but there were still some groups that supported it, that were not in league with the apostles.
They didn't abide by the council.
Right. Exactly. So 77. Did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preached the gospel to you free of charge. I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when was I with you? And when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. In other words, he preached without asking any support, which normally otherwise would come freely. He says, so I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you, God knows that I do. So Paul's love is the ultimate underlying reason for his preaching. So here he goes after these false apostles. What am I to do? And what I'm doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. In other words, these people are lying. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. For no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. What I'm saying with this boastful confidence, I will not say as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. Paul does use sarcasm. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, devours you, or take advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. They bear with all that. To my shame, he says, I must say we were too weak for that. So he does not bear with all of these things. Whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, countless beatings, and so forth. It's interesting with this that he claims to be a Hebrew and an Israelite and offspring of Abraham, but not a Jew. Because Judaism was a religion.
The Jews of the second temple believers, the rabbinical.
Well, the Second Temple and the synagogues were operated by the Jews, which were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Paul has left the Pharisees and is now, of course, with the Christians. And so he talks about his lineage not as a Pharisee here, although he does in other places, talks about how he was a Pharisee, and but he identifies this lineage, this Hebrew lineage, Hebrew Israelite son of Abraham. And then this whole list of his labors, imprisonments, beatings, and near death, receiving 40 lashes less one, beaten with rods, stoned, shipwrecked, adrift at sea, journeys, danger from rivers, from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night in hunger and thirst, often without food and cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is this daily pressure on me of anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak and I'm not weak? Who is made to fall and I'm not indignant? They can't accuse him of being weak with all of this. But yet he accepts to acknowledge his weakness. So if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, he who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. There's one more incident. So I think we'll stop here in the text. Does anybody have more questions or comments?
Leviticus, when Paul talks about speaking as a fool, is that related to the concept of fool for Christ's sake, Eurodive?
That's Eurodive is a later thing, but yeah, it's probably kind of a model.
Okay.
For it. Anybody else have anything? Okay. Well, so next week, God willing, I don't think we have any festal celebrations next week. The only The only Tuesday night I'll miss in October is on the 18th. Because I'll be up in Boston doing an ordination. So, but otherwise, I'm around. So, if anybody wants to brave the weather to come down on Saturday for liturgy, we have liturgy at 10 at the monastery on Saturdays, and be good to see you all in the flesh. So,
can you tell us anything about the new Metropolitan?
Well, Metropolitan Nicholas is an American. He comes from Russian heritage. He's fluent in Russian as well as, of course, in English. But English is his native language. I think he grew up in New York someplace. I'm not sure. But he's a very kind man. He was married. His wife died very young, and so he became the Kellenic for Metropolitan Loris. And then later on, he became the Kellenic and then auxiliary bishop for Metropolitan Hilarion. And so he worked with Metropolitan Hilarion for 8 years. And so between the two Metropolitans, he certainly knows ROCOR inside out. He went to Jordanville. He's very pastoral, very good, solid man, and he does have a missionary vision. So I'm very pleased that the bishops chose him for this position. So, and he's the same age I was when I got made Metropolitan, more or less.
Which was?
About 48, 49.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And he was Bishop of Manhattan?
Yeah, he was, in other words, he was the main auxiliary for the Metropolitan.
Oh.
So I'm very pleased, and I'm looking forward to being able to work with him. So, all right, anybody have anything else? Very good, so let's pray. As thou was voluntarily crucified for our sake. No, I better do this. It is truly me to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption, thou gavest birth to God the Word. The true Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always, now, and ever, and into ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Amen.
Thank you.